Welcome to The Happy Doc. My name is Taylor Brana. In this podcast and related website, thehappydoc.com, the goals are to inspire, develop knowledge, and provide tools to enhance your creativity, joy, and success as a health professional. Our guests provide their stories, tips, mindset, and much more, which have allowed them to succeed in such a demanding field. Our next guest is Charles D'Angelo, a weight loss expert and life coach that has worked with countless clients, including physicians. He has written books such as Think and Grow Thin, and he's about to release his new book, Inner Guru. These texts are all about changing the mindset that is essential for weight loss. He personally has an incredible transformation going from an obese weight to being incredibly fit. Through his own transformation, Charles has learned that success starts in the mind, and individuals such as Larry King and Tony Robbins have recommended his latest book. Let me tell you, this guy is the real deal. This conversation is incredible. He gives extremely valuable tips, not only about weight loss, but just life in general. Some of my favorite points that we discuss are the importance of finding your why, honoring yourself first, figuring out what influences you the most, understanding what recharges you, and having a sense of life purpose. There's obviously much more to this conversation, and he even digs into my story, and so we learn a little bit about what I've gone through in my life. I'm sure we're going to talk much more with Charles. He's been an incredible guest, and I hope you enjoy this episode. All right. Hello, everyone. This is Taylor, and this is another episode of The Happy Doc. I'm extremely excited to have our next guest, Charles D'Angelo. He's a weight loss instructor and life coach. And one of the amazing things I learned about him in terms of what he does is he actually was obese at one point and lost a tremendous amount of weight. And if you look at the photos, this guy is in tremendous shape. So he's a true inspiration. Anyways, without further ado, Charles, can you say hello?
Yes. Hey, how you doing, Taylor?
I'm doing fantastic. Again, sincerely, it's awesome to have you. So before I begin with some questions here, can you explain kind of what got you into changing your life around, and how did that process start for you?
Well, it was a situation wherein it wasn't one defining moment. For me, I grew up in a family of modest means. My father's side of the family all struggled with obesity and their comorbidities related to, of course, the case of being overweight. My father himself was hypertensive, suffered from type 2 diabetes, as did his parents. My mother's side of the family, while they were relatively thin, weren't necessarily healthy. They struggled with addiction to other substances. So you could say that my environment certainly wouldn't have predicted the blessing of success that I have experienced, nor would it have predicted the type of lifestyle I lead. And as that teenager growing up in that type of environment, I got up to 360 pounds. I had a size 50-inch waist. It was difficult even getting up 4 stairs, much less a flight of stairs, without being exhausted and out of breath. And I was tired. I was tired of feeling alone. I was tired of feeling just totally lethargic at the simplest tasks. Tying my shoes was difficult. Getting in and out of a car was difficult. And I was just 16, 17 years old. And I recognized that there certainly wasn't any lack of information out there. There were more diets that I knew what to do with. There were more pills on the market. There were trainers. There were gyms. But I recognized something was missing, that if knowledge was enough, then I certainly wouldn't have had the issue that I had. So I started to look around and ask myself what really needed to be in place in my life that wasn't, so that I could reclaim my health from my habits. And that's what started this whole process, beginning to recognize that there was something missing in the greater sense. There wasn't a diet or trainer or gym that was going to turn my life around. And if things were going to be different, it was going to require that I be different. And that's what started my journey.
Wow, that's amazing. And I mean, you've totally turned it around since then. It's amazing to have you as this example. And, obviously I've seen that you've written some books, Think and Grow Thin, and just kind of scrolling through it a little bit, you talk about the importance of the change in mindset and now you have this other book coming out, The Inner Guru. And I mean, it's great. Like I saw in these books, you have accolades from, Tony Robbins, for example, and Larry King on there. So let's go to the Think and Grow Thin book for a little bit. And, what was kind of the general mission or key to success that you've been finding in your process and what you can help with others?
Well, I think all of us are really kindred spirits on the same path. I mean, any medical professional, while I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist, I'm none of those things. I think we're all about creating more joy and happiness in the lives of those that we're blessed to come into contact with. And so, as that young man who was 360 pounds, I was miserable. I felt totally isolated. But when I transformed my life and I turned myself around and I lost that 160 pounds in just 2 years through changing my relationship with myself, first and foremost, food and exercise, just becoming consistent and doing fundamentally sound things. That's the thing. If you're listening to this and you're a physician yourself and you want to become more passionate and more effective in transforming the lives of those patients that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, I think the most important thing you need to look at is the reflection in the mirror. There's nothing more powerful than your own example. And so once I had transformed my life, I found that many people approached me asking me to help them start to transform theirs. So I did what most people would do. I became a person that looked for a gym to join, and I began helping people there, rather pro bono. I just helped them start to recognize that it wasn't going to be some exotic program that was going to transform the quality of their health or life. It was going to be a change in their own personal philosophy and attitude. And quite quickly, I made a name for myself in creating dramatic results, so much so that I built up quite a following in St. Louis, Missouri, so much that I was unable to keep up with the demand. So I had all this passion, all this juice that I wanted to share with people in how to really take their life to a whole new level, but I was limited to the one-on-one reach that I had. And my life was a great example, and my story was, and I was really, really called in my judgment to start to share that, because I think there's so many people that suffer quietly, that they have so much shame about the types of things that I went through, that they may be going through right now, that they feel stuck in a place they hate, and they feel like nothing's working. So I committed my life not only to serving people one-on-one, but I asked myself, how could I reach more people? And that was the genesis of my first book, Think and Grow Thin. In the journey of helping so many people, it would so happen that I would be invited to help several local politicians. And my name started to spread like wildfire. And the next thing I know, I'm getting calls from national level politicians. Not so much just for weight loss when people were coming to me, but what I found was we didn't talk a lot about food or about exercise. We were talking about what was keeping them from following through and really taking charge of their habits. What were they allowing to distract them from the real issues? And once we realized that food, like any substance, was being used to fill a void, a space in themselves that was meant to be filled by their own personal development or their relationships or their spiritual growth. Once we cleared that out and we eliminated that and we started to use food in an effective way to fuel them, people started to make the type of change that I made, losing 50, 60, 80, 100, 200 pounds in a very short amount of time. So what I found in that whole process was that there was a pattern to it, that there wasn't some magical formula, there wasn't some special DVD that was going to transform everyone's life. It was going to come by a shift in their mindset, as you said. And so, yes, food was a part of it. Yes, exercise is a piece of it. But without the glue that holds it together, kind of like a three-legged stool, you've got to have the leg of food, you've got to have the leg of exercise. But without the mindset piece, without that leg that holds this stool up, you can't sustain the change that a person makes. So I decided I was going to commit all that I knew to a book. And that's what I did. I wrote Think and Grow Thin. And I was very fortunate to be able to get that published quite quickly. I committed everything I knew to a system. I wanted to formulate something that anyone, anywhere could put into practice independent of having me sitting in front of them. And that's what people find in Think and Grow Thin. And I've been very fortunate that so many people have found it very, very helpful and transforming their lives.
Wow. So, I mean, first off, absolutely amazing. to have this turnaround, in your own life. Secondly, not only did you have that turnaround, but you've become the example, which has led to people wanting to see more from you. And then you take on the even greater initiative of writing these books, which have turned out like amazing. And another part of this whole thing, and I want people to really pay attention, is listen to the way Charles speaks. Charles has such passion and energy in the way, just even in the way you speak. If I even came into this conversation with a little bit less energy, the way you speak gets me personally amped up. I'm personally just getting excited listening to you, and so it really, you really are the example, and it's not just the books or whatever. You can feel it as you speak.
Well, I always tell people it's not so much what happens to you, Taylor, as it is what your response to those happenings are. I could have went through the things I went through, the bullying, the teasing. I mean, I had a really difficult upbringing. My mom really struggled, and she was an unbelievable cheerleader for me up until I was about 10. And then she started to be haunted by her past, and she started to drink. And that led to substance abuse with prescription pills. And then it led to physical abuse, taking it out on me and my siblings. And so when you grow up in that type of uncertain environment, you could really start to interpret that you're not worth much, that your life doesn't really matter, that people are out to get you, that you really can't trust that there's a guiding force in operation in the world, that there's something greater than all of us that's holding us together and that's calling us to become more of what we were born to be. So someone could go through what I went through and turn out as a criminal, as someone that hurts other people, as someone that uses their story, that uses their history as an excuse not to do more or become more. That's not what I chose. It's a choice all of us have to make. And as physicians, most of the healers that I've found in my life, doctors and alike, are people that have been personally touched in some way by pain and by being touched and letting it impact them, not destroy them, but allowing that to maintain their sensitivity, to maintain their humanity. I find that sometimes a patient, a client, all a person really needs is someone that's empathetic, that's willing to hear what they're really asking for. And sometimes I'm sure the listeners can testify that it's not another pill, it's not some prescription, but rather it's that someone cares and their needs are being heard. And my clients, the people that come here, it's almost like a Trojan horse. They're using food to meet their needs, and most of the needs are either relational or emotional. And once they identify that, they can start to really meet those needs in ways that are truly fulfilling and that really add value to their future rather than withdrawal from it. So it all begins by how you're leading your life. Are you using your past? Are you using your relatives? Are you using the circumstances to excuse the responsibility you have for making your life absolutely magnificent? And if you are, you're the only person that can turn that around. There's not a physician, there's not a coach, there's not a person on this planet that can make your life better unless you are willing and, most importantly, desiring the change that you deserve to have in your life. And it all starts with the belief that you do deserve that you're going to let go of this idea that it's everything around you that's going to determine the way your life turns out, and take charge of your habits by reclaiming what's yours, the power of choice.
Wow. Yeah, and a big theme here, and something I've gotten from other interviews as well, is these successful and happy doctors are taking true ownership, and you're really talking about that in this kind of, to summarize what you're saying, is taking ownership and not using those excuses. So a question I have for you is, let's say we have a doctor, that's going to come in as your client, and he's down in the dumps. He's not feeling motivated. He's saying, I don't have enough time. I see so many patients. I'm so busy, and I just want to flip my life around, but I just don't know how to do it. How do you approach that doctor, and what are kind of the tips that you provide?
Same way I approach you, or I'd approach anyone that's listening. If you're sitting at home and you're saying, I really don't have enough time, I really don't feel happy, I really don't feel fulfilled, The first and most important and most critical question, if you forget everything else I've said in this interview, this is the most important piece so far. And that is, you've got to ask yourself, why? Why do you not feel fulfilled by your work? Why do you find that you don't have what you say are enough hours in the day? There's one thing that's equal for all of us, whether it's Bill Gates, Charles D'Angelo, Taylor Brana, Dr. Smith, and that's we all have the same number of hours every single day. That's not going to change. That's a story. There's some truth to you might be very busy, but ultimately you get to construct your daily routine, the rituals that you either practice or you don't, but it all comes back to, what do you value most? Why are you working endless hours when you don't feel fulfilled? What are you getting from that? Because if you're honest with yourself, there's a payoff. You can say, oh, no, it's not. It's destroying my marriage. Well, what are you really running from by staying so present at work and so absent at home? And when you begin to look behind the symptom to the real cause, that is, why am I not doing what I know I ought to be doing? That's why people come to work with me. So yes, the weight loss can be the presenting, to use clinical language, the presenting symptom, but I'm not so interested in the presenting symptoms. I'm more interested in what's the root cause. Because if you're going to need to see me all the time to feel better, then I don't believe that to be a long-lasting, effective change. What we've got to learn to do is master the strategies of taking ownership of controlling how we feel. And how we feel is a result of how we're thinking. How you're thinking elicits certain emotions after you've interpreted the thought. So you have a thought that, I just don't have enough hours. Okay, well, what does that tell you? If you take a negative stance from that and say, well, so many people are so demanding and my wife wants so much from me and my kids are just out of their mind. They're busy and they're never home and I'm having to run them here and there. And that's the interpretation you take from the thought that I don't have enough time. You're going to feel very disempowered. Is it true? Are some of the things there in that interpretation true? Certainly. But is it going to move you closer to what your ultimate goal is? And one step that many physicians and many people that I work with in general haven't taken up until they meet me is actually defining what their goals are. A person says they want to lose weight. My question is why? Why not stay the way you are? Why change? Well, the person then says, it's because I just don't feel happy. Well, why don't you feel happy? Well, I go home and, I feel like I'm a stranger in my own house. Why do you feel that way? I haven't slept in the same room with my wife for 2 years. Now we're getting somewhere. So when you begin to ask, why am I really intent on this? You get a little deeper to the real core of what's going to keep you committed and really keep you focused on following through. Taylor, I asked you when you called me and requested that I be on your show, why do you do this podcast? And what was your answer?
I mean, ultimately, I just want to elevate and help as many people as possible. And it's the reason I've been in medicine in the first place, is to help people. And it's
okay, but why?
Truly,
why do you feel that's so important?
It's a good question.
Yes. Stay with it.
I'm obsessed with it, honestly. And it makes...
Go deeper.
I mean... in some ways, it's kind of selfish because it makes me feel really good.
You should be meeting your needs. But what's awesome about you is you're doing it in a way that also meets the needs of those you care about in the community in a much greater sense. But you've got to ask yourself, if you really want to examine what's driving you, get clear on what you really value, what really matters to you. Because when you start to really understand the driving forces behind the decisions you're making, you can decide if they're truly effective for the goals of the present. Often, we're doing things we don't even consider. We get so caught up and so distracted that we find ourselves in routines that we never really even had a chance or a choice to think about their long-term consequences. And that's ever so true with food. How many people say when they're asked, why do you weigh 100 pounds more than at a healthy place you really should, it's because of what my family trained me to do when I was a kid. All of my family always ate this way. We've always celebrated with food. Well, that might be true, but I didn't ask what was happening 20 years ago. I said, why are you this way now? And when a person begins to reclaim the power they have in ownership and taking responsibility, their life becomes unbelievably exciting because for the first time ever, they recognize they truly can start to become the directors of their life rather than feel like the victim. But if they think that the outcome of their life is going to be dependent on other people or circumstances, they'll always feel disempowered and really that they don't have much of a say in the way their life turns out. And that's a place none of us want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so kind of reading in between the lines a little bit here, one thing I'm hearing through all of this is someone needs to have really strong self-insight.
They need to have an understanding of the reasons behind the roadmap that they're following. Because all of us are following a map. But if you don't know where you're starting, if you don't see yourself for who and what you truly are and where you are, you've got to start with honesty. You've got to get behind all of the chatter, all of the excuses, and see yourself really where you are. You've got to be honest. And I'll tell you, it's not necessarily painless. In fact, pain is a very important indicator. It's one our society, unfortunately, tries to turn off. How many commercials can you find that suggest take this pill so you don't feel pain? Pain is telling you something very important, that you're not where you need to be or there's something off in your life. You need to listen to the message of pain. Don't give it more power in your life than it's meant to have. Pain is simply a messenger. It's telling you, look, you're not where either you wanted to be, have been told you should be, or know that by this stage in your life, you ought to be. Now, you get to decide which of those is true. Is it you're not meeting the expectations of others, or you're not meeting the expectations of yourself? If it's the latter, then it's easy to then decide, are my expectations reasonable? You know, it's not that you can't have everything, it's you can't have everything at the same time. So sometimes it's our expectations on when we should be or where we should be in a certain time period. We've just got to adjust the frame of reference. Yes, you shouldn't be 100 pounds overweight. You should be at your healthy weight. But you can't get there by tomorrow. So you can put yourself on the track to getting there. But that starts by coming to appreciate and have some empathy for where you really are. Here I am, 100 pounds over fat. Fine. Now, where do I want to be 3, 6, 9 months from now? So once you take ownership for where you are and you begin to understand the reasons, absolutely critical, where you don't allow yourself any slack, where you say, I'm never going to go back, where you learn how to hold yourself to an agreement and understand that the slightest variation, you don't need to beat yourself up about it, but you stay aware of that little voice that tries to tell you it's okay to settle, that tries to tell you it's okay not to give all you have. When you start to become aware of that little voice creeping in, it's not changing from having an apple to having celery that's a problem. In my program, I ask clients to choose a set of foods and stay consistent so that they can keep themselves in the mindset, in the frame of not using food for anything but fuel, where food for them becomes as automatic as like driving. It's not when you want to have something different that's healthy, the problem. The problem is that you're starting to use food again to deal with emotional issues. So the real key is, how do I set a standard for myself and follow through even when I don't feel like it? And that comes down to, again, understanding the reasons. Make it bigger than just for you. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't honor yourself. That comes first. But you also, I always ask people to enroll a larger purpose to their goals so that they feel compelled when it does get tough. Because it's just because something's simple doesn't mean it's going to be easy. So as they begin to make the progress that they really have always wanted and they've always deserved, it can be very easy to start to tell themselves this narrative that, well, hell, I've already lost 50 pounds. What's one bite, one drink, one thing different than what I'm supposed to do or I've committed myself to doing for myself gonna matter? it matters a lot because it's breaking an agreement that you made with yourself. It's undermining your own integrity. It's irrelevant as to what the choice is that you break the agreement with. The idea is you have shifted yourself, even if it's just a few millimeters, off of track. And if that goes unchecked long enough, you'll end up in a place you never, ever, ever intended to get. And usually when it's a violation of a personal agreement with oneself, it's a place that's negative. It's either they regress back to where they started when it comes to weight, or if they're trying to cease smoking, they have one cigarette and tell themselves, well, it was just one. You've got to learn from that and catch yourself early. Again, you don't want to beat yourself up. You can't build on failure, but you want to become aware and say, isn't that interesting that here I was so consistent for so long? What does that tell me that I chose to use food or put in that place whatever substance you want when I was feeling so stressed? What was I trying to do with that? And when you get some clarity that way, that degree of insight can free you of that habit that's really robbing you of your future.
So when someone does fall off the beaten track a little bit, I mean, obviously you're a coach, and you did describe this agreement. So how does one form this agreement, and then how do you help people maintain that? Like, what questions are you asking, and how do you guide them?
I think it's different for each person. Some people are extremely readied to hold themselves to a standard that's above what anyone, including me, would ever expect of them. And that's awesome. But for those people that find they're feeling compelled back to the patterns that really held them prisoner, you've got to ask yourself, what's influencing you most? And if you're spending a lot of time with people who don't share the same values that you share or that you have, it's very easy to feel yourself pulled back to a place you really don't want to be in. So I would first encourage someone to examine where they're spending most of their time. What's influencing you? Who are you allowing to stream into your life? Where are you getting recharged at, and who from? Because who you spend your time with, where you spend your time, all has a very subtle yet profound influence on the way you see the world. And ultimately, that's what this is all about, shifting your worldview. You can go through life and feel like the way life turns out, is because of your genetics, or it's because of your history, or it's because of your heredity, or it's because of the neighborhood you grew up in. And there are a lot of people who will side with you on that. I'm not one of them, but I'm more interested in the people that, despite all those things, have become unbelievably successful. And so you want to ask yourself, which side do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the side that says, I'd rather just blame everyone else? And I used to be the king of blame. I had this whole list of why my life wasn't working, why I was 360 pounds. It was because my family was relatively poor. It was because all of my father's side was overweight and had bad habits. It was because all the kids at school bullied me. It was because I was always different and I felt like I didn't fit in. I had this whole list. And were those things true? Sure. But was focusing on those things going to move my life in a direction that I really wanted it to go in? Absolutely not. So I had to replace that list with a list of reasons why I had to change. When I made that simple shift, that's what created the type of transformation in my life that you spoke of, where I've been blessed to have endorsements from President Bill Clinton, comments from Tony Robbins, forward written by Larry King, not because of, oh my gosh, I'm so brilliant and intelligent, but because I have so much passion and my message really resonated with people who were like-minded, people that recognize your history doesn't have to be your future unless you stay there. I think it's very worthwhile to examine your history and take lessons from it. Use the people you grew up with, even if they weren't the healthiest or weren't the most sophisticated, not as an example, but as a warning of, this is what I am not going to do. But again, sometimes at early stages in our life, we don't have a chance to reflect on the choices we're beginning to make. But now that we're adults, especially as physicians, you can look at your life and say, is what I'm doing really working? Am I just treating symptoms every day? I'm not just talking about the life of a patient. I'm talking about your own life. Am I masking what the real issue is? Am I overworking, overeating, underexercising? Because there's been no passion in my life for a very long time. Am I staying later at the hospital or later at the clinic because I don't feel in control when I'm at home? But I know when I'm at work, I feel that way. When you start to ask yourself those penetrating, deep questions, not the surface level stuff of, oh, I want to fit in a smaller pant size, you can really shift your life in a way that takes you to a place that you've only dreamt of. But that takes true courage. It takes true bravery to own yourself in that way. And it's not a process that can happen overnight. You can't go from where you are to where you want to be, but you can start moving in that direction by starting to ask yourself these types of questions. And I talk about all these questions in that book, my most recent book, Inner Guru.
Wow. I mean, listen, I love the depth of these questions that you are asking your clients and that we should all take personal responsibility for. Again,
I just get the sense that you really care. I think that you really are a guy that is invested in the betterment of others. And I'm curious, what got you into it?
Yeah, sure. Wow. I mean, we can go through a whole story in terms of my background, but I had a lot of difficulties in my own life, and I came from an affluent family and this and that, but the main thing was I actually trained as a gymnast. Since the age of 6 years old, I was an athlete. And when I went to college, I went through a very difficult time in my life where my family moved from the United States to out of the country, and I went from the West Coast to the East Coast. During that time, I underwent a very deep depression. And I had a lot of great things going for me. I was an athlete.
That doesn't matter when you feel that way.
This and that. But yeah, I lost everyone. And I actually went through a bout of seriously considering hurting myself.
Now, what was it you were telling yourself, Taylor, at that point that brought you to that place of thinking of harming yourself?
I mean, I just felt so alone because all the close people in my life had left, and I had this huge transition of not having many friends.
So what was the identity change? What did you think differently about? How did you see yourself differently when you relocated? Once all those people were no longer in proximity to you, what was the meaning you gave to that? What was the interpretation you took from that happening?
I felt like they abandoned me in some way. I felt like I wasn't worth it.
And how long did it take you to come to that realization?
Initially, I gave a lot of reasons as to why they did it, and I try to, justify it in a lot of ways.
Well, you love them. Sounds
like. But I love them, right? So even though I wanted to, logically give a reason why that this all happened, the long and short of it was, yes, I felt like I was abandoned and like not loved for, because, physical proximity is important, obviously.
Sure. It sounds like you didn't have a lot that was feeding into your life. So you, in some ways, thought of abandoning yourself.
Yes, definitely. And it got to a point of depression, which they talk about in psychiatry, called pseudo-dementia, where I was so down, I could not even concentrate. I at one point thought I had gone through a stroke. It's funny, I've never publicly talked about this, so this is fun. But I actually thought I had a stroke because I literally could not speak certain words. I couldn't pull words out of my mind. And I had images of like nightmarish type of things like going on in my head. It was terrible.
Think about how, and this isn't said in a critical or judgmental way, but think about
that's fine.
What do you think? Isn't it wonderful to see how the mind works that way? What was the payoff in all of that?
Wow. So, and this is what I talk to people in terms of my own life. When you go through the legitimately worst case scenario where you feel like you want to harm yourself, you are so low you don't care about yourself, and you feel this deep internal hate for what's going on in your life. And then you feel that situation, and then all of a sudden, and it really was a change of mindset for me, where I stopped caring about. It was almost a switch. I realized, I was like, if I'm willing, and this is where the big switch came in. It was a simple thought, and it changed everything. I thought, if I'm so willing to potentially end my life or hurt myself, and I'm potentially going to take that
That's not the
risk.
way you were thinking about it, though, Taylor. If you're honest with
Initially, I
yourself,
wasn't.
what was the idea of ending your life going to give you? If you're honest, if you're honest with yourself, what did you?
It was an escape. It was escape from the situation.
And so, how did you bring yourself back? For anyone that's maybe listening who has had those similar thoughts, what did you do to bring yourself back?
Honestly, and this is the way I have to say it, it was literally at one thought changed it all for me. And it was, if I'm so willing to take this risk to hurt myself in some way or be this down, why can't I take the risk to live? And
That's beautiful.
when I had
That is beautiful.
Yeah, and it was a simple thought, but it changed everything. And
Why do you
through
think
that
that's
thought,
simple?
I was
That is very profound, Taylor.
it's simple in that it was literally a sentence that changed it. You know, it was just one sentence.
Do you remember when it hit
That
you?
was
Do you remember when it hit you?
Yeah, I really do. It was during winter time, and again, I'm from the West Coast, so part of what was feeding into this, and I didn't realize it at the time, is my system has been so used to sunlight.
Your system has been used to the most beautiful place on the planet.
Exactly. So my body has been used to sunshine and warm weather and positive energy and people. So to go from that environment to the East Coast, which is a lot more direct, people are a little, I wouldn't say rude, but more direct. They're into different things, not my personal style at the time. And on top of that, cold weather and legitimately like a lot less sun. And the situation, it just culminated.
And you didn't even mention the shift in your practice of gymnastics.
Yes, that too. I mean, and that's, so a lot of these factors just changing and changes of friends and everything. And yeah, that one change in insight, that one statement allowed me to boldly attack my life. I started to talk to people. I started to be more social. I started to be a little bit more aggressive in classes. I slowly slipped out of this kind of depressed mind state and started just taking a little bit more chances in experiencing life. And it was this weird thing that the depression actually brought out in me more of my personality and allowed me to be more of who I really was in a new environment. So, and it's funny because that situation, I can, at any point in my life, that deep depression and that situation, because of the depth of how terrible it was, I can, whenever I'm in a bad spot, whenever I feel terrible, I can always go there and say, you know what, I overcame that. I can overcome anything. And
this is a storm that could have been, you may consider, an incubator for some of your greatest creative efforts ever. How can you be so sure that depression isn't an incubation place for those of us who find in those depths a lot of insight and meaning?
I mean, that's a very profound statement in and of itself, and you're absolutely right.
I'm not saying it feels good, but I'm suggesting what would happen if, when you find yourself in that state, you don't look at it as a sign so much of there's something wrong as much as it's a place of depth for you, that it's a pattern that you can choose to interpret in whichever way you like, but you use it. From what you've shared with me, you use that as a place, after you developed enough insight and awareness of it, to just launch yourself in a profound and meaningful way into a whole new level, into a whole new sphere of influence in your life. It may have been what resulted in you deciding you were going to create this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, ever kind of since that time in my life, things truly did shift. I mean, I started doing tremendously better in school. I performed a while in gymnastics. I became the team captain. I applied to medical
You
school,
started to
and
form
a lot of
relationships, it
good.
sounds like.
Yes, that sense of aloneness. I overcame it, and then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make some friends, and I'm gonna go out there and present myself, and that is very true. That is exactly what
How
happened.
did you find your faith tied into it?
That was actually, and I've had this conversation before with people. Innately, I've never been religious. I would always consider myself spiritual,
Yeah.
however. And for me, I've always had this deep sense that inside the world was ultimately positive, and there's no way I can prove that.
So why would you feel you need to prove that?
Yeah, no, there's no need, but I've just always had that sense inside myself that things are always generally spun positively. And even in the darkest depths of myself, I could always hang on to that little sense of positivity. And in the darkest of places, I found that little bit of light, and that's all I needed.
Yes. And what did you do as far as after this episode to keep yourself from falling back into that?
I really do think a lot of it had to do with forming new relationships. I think that once I started to begin the process within myself and I started to expand that to kind of interacting with my environment, my positivity and the friends I created were ultimately able to keep me in a better state of mind. In a lot of ways, I talked about this too, is I created a family because I kind of felt like I was abandoned. I created a family in my local
It
environment.
sounds like this might be an extension of that.
Oh, that's an interesting interpretation. You know what? That's not totally impossible. I mean, in a lot of
I can
ways,
hear your smile. I can hear your smile.
yeah, I mean, in some ways, this could be this opening up this network of mentors and fantastic people to interview. In a lot of ways, is expanding myself, so to speak, and maintaining my own positivity as I go through my own
It's
work.
allowing you to connect more. And I think tie it all together. The reason I spend so much time with you, Taylor, doing that is so that the listeners who listen more to your podcast for you than me can see that no matter what circumstances a person faces, no matter what their history, you don't have to be poor to have issues, nor do you have to be wealthy or affluent to have issues. Everyone has issues. Everyone has problems. And Taylor has so well demonstrated that they're not selective. All of us can go through periods of life when we go through transitions that we can interpret in a way that really makes us feel worthless. It makes us feel life isn't worth living. Is it true, Taylor, that you didn't have the friends that you were most familiar with around? Yes. But it's also true that you found who you really are at your core through that really challenging experience? Absolutely. So the key for anyone listening who is in that stage or in that season, in that storm where they feel like they've tried everything and nothing works, recognize that it's just a season, it will pass, that there are things you can actively begin to do in this season of your life to set it up. So once the new season does come around, you're positioned to do as well as Taylor has done or as I have done or any of my clients have. It's all a result of the choices you're making in those seasons. And sometimes life will take you by surprise, as it did for Taylor. I mean, he was uprooted, and despite having resources financially, the most wonderful resource I found in my life has been love and intimacy with the people who matter most by being willing to step into vulnerability. I mean, if you have anyone who's morbidly obese, I am absolutely certain that one of their issues is that they aren't feeling as fulfilled as they could. I'm not saying that fat people aren't happy. People that are over fat aren't happy. I'm saying that if you're not honoring yourself, if you're not doing for yourself everything you can to show yourself respect and love, it's very difficult to be as present with those you care about and to really give as much of yourself in the relationship as you want to. And so when you start to invest in yourself by taking care of yourself, when you're a doctor and you have so many patients that you're the steward of, it's absolutely critical that you're managing your own self-care so you have that much more to give to those people that God's calling into your life for you to serve. But if you're focused more on your own issues, even with the purest of intent, you can't be truly in flow and present. The reason I can be totally with Taylor while I'm talking is because I'm not in my own head filtering myself. I'm letting what happens happen. And it's absolutely critical for all of us to get as much of the things out of our way as we can, our own anxieties, our own concerns, so we can be as fluent as we possibly can be and letting our true purpose, our true essence be just flowing from us. But that won't happen if half the time you're thinking about how you look. You're thinking about not having energy. If you don't have energy, what matters? So it's absolutely critical you start with you. Change starts with you. When you start to change, you'll find everything that matters in your life will start to change. It was Wayne Dyer, I think, that said, if you look at things differently, the things you look at will change. So if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at will change. To say it even more succinctly, you've got to change your perspective. When Taylor took the perspective he did here and recognizing every adversity he has faced up to now led him to this very conversation with me and creating a much broader community of connection, it illuminated some things that he hadn't considered. And the same can be true for you if you'll look at your life and ask yourself, what am I really after? What really matters? Of course, you can lose all the weight you want to lose, but you want to understand why it's important to you to do it so that once you get there, you really can enjoy it. Getting what you want and being dissatisfied or still finding yourself unhappy is the worst place to be. Think about having a huge bank account, looking in the mirror and being someone and having the body and the physique that others idolize, but being unhappy with yourself. And there are a lot of people that do that. There are a lot of physicians, some of whom I've worked with, that they have the affluence, they have the cars, they have the prestige, they have all the degrees, but they're still not happy because their emotional needs can't be met by another diploma. Their emotional needs can't be met by another notch on their belt of a woman that they have slept with. You've got to give yourself the gift that only you can give, and that's your own approval, your own love. But if we grow up challenged by the people around us, our parents, maybe they're incapable of giving us what we feel we need at that time, often it can influence what we'll give ourselves later. So give yourself the gift today of starting to honor yourself, of starting to love yourself by doing what you know, by putting yourself around other people who are doing the very same thing, who work to build you up rather than tear you down, and you'll be setting yourself up for a life of lasting fulfillment and success.
Wow. And I think this is actually a great message to kind of close on. A lot of doctors, a lot of health professionals, you know this, love to help other people, but forget to help themselves. And when we can save ourselves and ultimately live a life that is very true, living our true passion.
Living authentically. Yes.
Living authentically, yeah, when we find that deep sense of self, deep sense of purpose, it allows us to show up in the world in a really beautiful way and to heal others more effectively. And that's what you're showing off, Charles, even speaking to me today. I mean, I feel more uplifted after this conversation. So I'm going to leave this section open for you. Is there anything you want to close in terms of the students listening, in terms of the doctors listening? What would you like to close out with and to and allow others to really heal themselves the way you allow them to?
I think none of us heal anyone. I think that we simply move things out of people's way to heal themselves. I think that even medications, while I'm certainly a neophyte and an amateur at understanding medicine in the clinical sense, I think that most either do one of two things. They either stop your body from doing something it would naturally do, or it enhances what it does. I don't think we heal others. I think we can help others heal themselves by our message and, more importantly, by our example. If you're willing to be transparent with your patients, and it all comes back to being honest with yourself, I think you can have that much greater of an impact on their life. But if you feel that because of something that you suffered, whether it was abuse, trauma, sadness, tragedy, or loss, that episode or that happening, if you've owned that as part of who you are and you have shame or you don't feel as worthy because of it, I think that most people can sense that, and they can sense that there's a guard up and that you're not truly present. I think true power emanates from true presence. That when you're truly present with a person, when you don't have an expectation or an outcome, I walk in this interview with you, Taylor, I don't have any expectation of what happens. I'm just listening to you and listening to what I hear and recognizing that if you can stay present, everything you need will come to you. But when you go in your head and you start to go off on these fairy tales of why things are the way they are, and very little of it has to do with your choices, time passes you by. Time is an illusion. You only have right now. I think that I've often said that the greatest enemy of most of us is tomorrow. It's telling ourselves that we'll do it tomorrow, telling ourselves we'll start working on this tomorrow. Now, this moment is the time to start. It's the only moment you have. And by starting your process, you can't begin to imagine how your influence, how your example will impact like a ripple effect out into the lives of your patients, their families, and the community in a very broad sense. So recognize that you have been given a position, if you're a student, of honor. You're chosen. I mean, to think that you've committed your life to helping others better themselves is such an admirable and wonderful thing. Make certain that you honor the person that's made that decision, and that's you. And I've said before, if you're in an airplane and the airplane is going down, what do they say when the oxygen masks drop? They don't say, take the oxygen mask and put it on your child first. They say, put it on you first. So you've got to, of course, be taking care daily of your needs. But you need to know what those needs are. And if you find yourself over-fat, under-exercised, unfulfilled in your relationships, there's a reason. And it's not necessarily easy to make the changes that you'll make, but it is really simple. I know that it's possible. You can see that in my life. You can see that in the lives of thousands of my clients. You can obviously see it in the life of your host, Taylor. And if you'll make those changes, when you make those changes, I'm here to tell you it'll be something you'll never regret. And that's the one thing that I work fervently to help people never have to deal with. I don't know if there's any greater pain in life than having to admit to oneself when it's too late that I could have done something, I should have done something, but I didn't. My hope is that I never, ever, ever hear from any of you who are struggling with your weight ever again after hearing this, that I don't find you in my office, but rather I hear of your success, whether it be through Taylor, whether it be through an email, whether it be on Amazon, you pick up my book, Inner Guru, that you share that this brief conversation we had made an impact, that my voice goes with you, and that it definitely helps you see yourself in a way you may have long forgotten. So God's blessings to everybody listening, and thanks for having me, Taylor.
Wow, it was great to have you. That was great advice and insight, and truly appreciate having you.
It's my honor, buddy.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening into this episode. It was a blast to record. If you have any comments or feedback, send me a message to any of my channels. The Facebook page is www.facebook.com/thehappydoc. The Twitter account is thehappydoc1. The Instagram account is thehappydoc1. You can send me an email to thehappydoc1@gmail.com. And now I have something to ask of you. If you are with my mission of elevating the space of medical care and the medical community, if you are with my mission of elevating the positivity that is within this space, then please comment, like, and share this material. Have a great week, guys, and tune in to a new episode every Sunday.